Most people think destruction requires drama, yelling, arguing, or revenge. But the sharpest minds in history knew better. Machiavelli taught subtle erosion, not noise. The Stoics? They won through silence, not confrontation. No anger, no chaos, just precision. What if you could dismantle someone's power without ever raising your voice? What if the deadliest move was delivered with a smile and they never saw it coming? In this video, you'll learn the art of polite destruction, a strategy that uses calmness as a weapon and silence as a sentence. No outbursts, no mess, just psychological mastery. If you're tired of toxic people but too wise to play their game, you're in the right place. Subscribe and turn on notifications because while others react, we respond, and that's how you win.
Number 1.
Withhold emotional reaction. The first and most disarming tactic in the art of polite destruction is this. Do not react emotionally, not to insults, not to manipulation, not to passive-aggressive remarks meant to lure you into conflict. The moment you react, when you snap, argue, or even over-explain, you've entered their game, you've allowed them to dictate your emotional state, and in that moment, you've handed over your power. Epictetus said it clearly. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. The insult itself has no power. What gives it life is your consent. The Stoics were not immune to offense. They were immune to ownership of it. They saw emotional control not as repression, but as liberation. The moment you become reactive, you become readable, and the moment you become readable, you become predictable. That's when they win. So how do you respond? Not with icy silence or passive aggression, but with calm, deliberate indifference, a simple nod, a neutral smile, or better yet, a vague phrase like, "You could be right." That sentence is lethal because it gives them nothing to push against. It derails the confrontation, it poisons their momentum without them realizing it, and it places you above the game while they spiral in confusion. When people come to you looking for drama and receive grace instead, they don't know where to aim. It's like shadow boxing. They're swinging at a ghost. You've become untouchable without needing to lift a finger. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men of his time, governed an empire filled with betrayal, pressure, and criticism. Yet in his private journal, Meditations, he reminded himself, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed." That isn't denial, it's clarity. The world may try to provoke you, but you decide what enters your soul. Now consider this in modern life. Picture a business meeting. Someone challenges your credibility in front of the group with a subtle jab. Well, that's one way to look at it. Most people would jump in, defend their point, or escalate. But the Stoic strategy is to smile and say, "True, it's not the only way." Suddenly, they're left holding their hostility alone. You haven't conceded, yet you haven't lowered yourself either. You've remained above the waterline. That is power. This isn't about playing weak, it's about playing wise. Reaction is what they expect. Stillness is what they fear. Because when you don't react, they can't feed off your energy. And without fuel, even the most aggressive fires go out. Now let's bring this into sharper focus with a public figure. Take Keanu Reeves. Not because he's stoic in theory, but because he lives it in practice. He's endured loss, slander, and public speculation, yet he never lashes out, never defends, never engages the noise. He simply lives with presence, responds only when needed, and allows his silence to do what arguments never could. That calm, that detachment, is why people trust him, why people admire him, because in a world of overreactions, detachment is rare and magnetic. This principle extends even further, Seneca taught. No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. Every insult you endure without reacting is a silent triumph. Every time you choose not to engage, you build something stronger than reputation. You build inner armor. But remember, this doesn't mean you suppress your truth. It means you respond when it matters and ignore what doesn't. You must train your emotions not to perform, but to serve your clarity, and the training is daily. Begin with the small provocations, the sideways comment, the snide remark, the subtle disrespect. Practice giving it no energy. Let it pass through you like wind through open hands. Because the more they want a reaction, the less you owe them one. This is the paradox they can't solve. The quieter you are, the louder your presence becomes. And when you stand in that stillness, something shifts. The power dynamic reverses. They become emotional. You become composed. They become reactive. You become unreadable. And that is how you win, without appearing to fight. The Stoic path is not to avoid conflict, but to transcend the need to prove yourself within it. And withholding your emotional reaction is the first move in that elevation. Calmness, then, is not silence. It's strategy, a refusal to bleed in front of those who want to see you wounded. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them burn out trying to ignite you, because when you don't react, you don't just protect your peace, you destroy their illusion of control.
Number 2.
Social freezing. There's a form of silence that doesn't disappear, but unsettles. It doesn't scream rejection. It whispers distance. This is the art of social freezing. You don't cut someone off entirely. You don't lash out. You don't even ignore them. You simply stop bringing warmth. You remove the glow from your presence. You offer mechanical politeness and nothing more. This tactic, when done intentionally, is not cruel. It's clarifying, because most people rely on emotional cues to feel secure. Your tone, your smile, your attention, take those away and you haven't broken any rule, but you've broken the illusion that they still matter to you in the same way. Stoicism calls this the discipline of indifference, not apathy, but selective energy. As Epictetus said, what upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about things. By going emotionally neutral, you strip away their power to provoke or manipulate. You force them to confront the void they've created, without you having to explain anything. Now let's be clear, this isn't ghosting. Ghosting is avoidance. Social freezing is presence without participation. You reply to their messages, but only with facts. You acknowledge their words, but without reaction. You nod in conversations, but your eyes don't light up. Your tone, flat, respectful, but barren. You've become courteous, but unreadable. This creates a psychological vacuum, because humans, by nature, fear ambiguity more than rejection. Rejection is clear. Ambiguity leaves them spiraling, wondering what went wrong. And yet, you've said nothing cruel. You've offered no accusations. That's what makes it powerful. You've removed the emotional privileges they once enjoyed, without announcement. Marcus Aurelius modeled this in his leadership. He often dealt with betrayal, disloyalty, and political scheming, but rather than retaliate publicly, he simply withdrew emotional engagement. In Meditations, he reminds himself, be tolerant with others, strict with yourself. In other words, stay kind, but remove unnecessary entanglement. Offer decency, but no longer offer closeness. And this approach isn't just historical. It's painfully modern. Take Maya Angelou, for example. In her autobiographical works, she described how, after experiencing betrayal from someone she trusted, she didn't argue. She didn't curse. She simply stopped giving them the intimacy of her attention. That withdrawal wasn't passive, it was a statement. You no longer have access to my inner world. And that's the essence of social freezing. You're not punishing someone. You're protecting your peace. You're not trying to manipulate them. You're refusing to be manipulated further. The Stoics believed that inner stillness was the highest form of power, and sometimes the only way to reclaim that stillness is to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. But here's the genius in this tactic. It also gives them space, not space to chase you, but space to reflect. And that space is uncomfortable, because in the absence of your warmth, they're left alone with their behavior. And that discomfort is often the only thing that leads to honest self-examination. As Seneca put it, associate with people who are likely to improve you. When you find yourself around someone who drains, distorts, or disrespects, you owe them basic courtesy, but you no longer owe them your presence in full color. Monochrome is enough. Now let's address the question, isn't this manipulative? The answer lies in your intention. If you're doing it to hurt, it's cruel. If you're doing it to protect your clarity, it's wise. Stoicism is not about being emotionless, it's about emotional discipline. And discipline sometimes means not giving people the intimacy they've lost the right to access. This tactic creates psychological dissonance in the minds of those who've crossed a line. They start asking themselves, did I do something wrong? Did something shift? And the silence doesn't confirm, it doesn't deny, it lets them wrestle with their own conscience, often for the first time. And this ambiguity, it's not a bug, it's the feature. Because the moment you explain yourself to someone who's already violated your boundaries, you give them another chance to twist the narrative. But when you go quiet, not absent, just cold, they can't play the victim. You've remained polite. You've remained present. You've just made it clear. They're no longer standing in the warmth of your fire. So if someone keeps pushing your limits, don't yell. Don't beg. Don't over-explain. Just freeze the connection. Be there, but hollow. Speak, but bland. Nod, but distant. Eventually, they'll feel the winter you've created. And in that quiet frost, they'll realize the cost of losing access to someone who once gave them warmth. That is the second tactic in this art of calm destruction. Not loud, not harsh, just cold enough to wake them up.
Number 3.
Use empty praise and Socratic sabotage. There is a certain art to destruction that involves no confrontation, no raised voices, and no accusations. Just space, just questions, just the subtle manipulation of ego until it collapses under its own weight. This is the tactic of empty praise and Socratic sabotage, a method so refined that most people don't realize they're being dismantled until long after it's over. Let's begin with empty praise. This isn't flattery, it's not even sarcasm, it's a calculated ambiguity delivered with perfect calm. You compliment them, but not really. You say things like, your presentation style is certainly unique, or there's definitely something original about the way you handled that. The words sound kind, even admiring, but they carry no confirmation of quality, no anchor, just fog dressed in courtesy. And here's the brilliance. Most egos crave approval so deeply that they'll accept any praise. No matter how hollow, they'll nod, smile, maybe even quote you. But something will linger, a faint sense that something wasn't quite right. You've planted a splinter of uncertainty, and it will grow. Because vague compliments don't satisfy. They confuse. They make the person question, was that admiration or a polite insult? This tactic doesn't wound immediately. It erodes slowly, quietly, elegantly. It offers them something they can't quite grasp, and that ambiguity becomes the very thing that eats away at their certainty. But paired with the second move, Socratic sabotage, it becomes something else entirely. Socratic sabotage is the use of innocent-sounding questions to reveal someone's ignorance or inconsistency. You're not attacking, you're just asking. But the right question, at the right time, in front of the right audience, can do more damage than any insult ever could. Ask, That's an interesting theory. Can you walk us through your reasoning? Or what inspired you to approach it that way? These questions aren't traps, they're mirrors. And if the person has nothing behind their performance, if their ideas are stolen, shallow, or poorly thought out, they'll expose themselves trying to answer. And you remain calm, respectful. You've said nothing critical. You've just handed them the stage, and they collapsed under their own spotlight. This method comes directly from Socrates himself. He never called people fools. He never insulted their logic. He simply asked, "What do you mean by that? Could you explain further?" And eventually, through a sequence of seemingly polite questions, he would guide them to a contradiction. They weren't defeated by him, they were defeated by their own assumptions. Marcus Aurelius used a similar approach, though more inwardly in Meditations he writes, "If someone is mistaken, instruct them kindly and show them their error. If you can't, then blame yourself, or not even that." In other words, truth reveals itself through clarity, not combat. When someone's logic is weak, your best weapon is not correction, it's exposure through inquiry. And in modern life, we see this everywhere. Consider how Oprah Winfrey handled interviews with powerful people. She rarely argued, she rarely pushed. But her questions, simple, precise, disarming, often made guests unravel. She gave them space to speak, and in that space, truth surfaced. This is why the combination of empty praise and Socratic questioning is so effective. One tactic builds uncertainty, the other surfaces weakness. One plants doubt in private, the other reveals truth in public. And you stay composed. You haven't raised your voice. You haven't made a single accusation, but you've steered the conversation toward collapse with surgical grace. Now let's ground this in character. Steve Jobs, famously intense, mastered this method. In meetings, he wouldn't reject ideas with aggression. He'd ask, "Why do you think that will work?" Or, "What evidence do you have for that?" Those who came prepared thrived. Those who were bluffing fell apart. His silence was sharp. His questions were blades. And the beauty of this tactic is that it doesn't create enemies. It creates mirrors. You don't have to tell someone they're out of their depth. You give them a platform and let gravity do the rest. No judgment, no insult, just reality revealed. This is not about cruelty. It's about clarity. The world is filled with noise, opinions spoken louder than they are thought through. The wise don't argue with noise. They hand it a microphone and let it destroy itself. So next time someone is performing for power, don't challenge them directly. Offer a vague compliment. Then ask a polite question. Watch carefully. If they are real, they will respond with strength. But if they are empty, the performance will break. This tactic requires patience, discipline, timing. But when done well, it creates no mess, no enemy, no drama, just silence where arrogance used to be. And that is the third move in your arsenal. Praise that says nothing and questions that say everything.
Number 4.
Public agreement, private undermining. One of the most elegant forms of polite destruction is the tactic of public agreement, followed by private undermining. On the surface, you're an ally. You agree, you nod, you validate, you echo their ideas just enough to make them feel supported. But underneath, in private rooms and subtle conversations, you shift the current. You don't oppose them directly. You erode the foundation they're standing on. This strategy is not about deceit, it's about redirection. You don't lie, you don't slander, you don't attack. Instead, you create a gap between perception and truth and let time do the rest. The Stoics understood the power of misdirection, not to manipulate others, but to preserve their own peace while still shaping outcomes. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In other words, don't lower yourself to the noise. Don't match their aggression with more aggression. Instead, use silence and precision to reveal what arrogance cannot hide. So how does this tactic actually work? Imagine a group setting, a meeting, a panel, a collaboration. Someone puts forward a flawed idea, but they do it with confidence. In that moment, you don't resist, you don't challenge. Instead, you say something like, "That's an interesting angle. I can see how that could work." You've given them affirmation, you've made them feel seen, but you've also left the outcome open-ended. Then later, when the energy has settled, you ask someone else in the room, "Did that plan feel fully developed to you?" Or, "I wonder if we considered the long-term effects of that approach." These aren't accusations, they're invitations. They cause others to think for themselves. And when done consistently, they change the climate of trust around that person without ever drawing attention to you. This tactic is powerful because it works on the level of perception, and in every environment, perception is currency. If people begin to question a leader's ideas, even slightly, the leader's control starts to crack. But because you never directly attacked, your hands remain clean, you appear neutral, thoughtful, respectful, and that's what makes it so effective. Now, this requires restraint. You must resist the urge to expose someone too quickly. This isn't about revenge, it's about destabilizing false authority, quietly, ethically, and efficiently. You're not spreading gossip, you're raising questions, and people remember the source of good questions more than the source of loud opinions. Barack Obama often used this technique in political environments. In public forums, he would affirm opposing views respectfully, even graciously, but later in a separate setting, he'd redirect the narrative with logic and calm precision. He didn't need to humiliate, he needed only to reframe. And by the time the other side realized what had happened, the momentum had already shifted. This tactic also reflects Epictetus' teaching. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. When you stay calm, when you nod politely, when you appear cooperative, you disarm resistance. But when you follow up with disciplined inquiry, you plant seeds that bloom without noise. And let's be clear, this is not manipulation, it's wisdom. Because some people can't be corrected directly. Their ego is too fragile, their power too performative. If you confront them head-on, they'll deny, deflect, or double down. But if you let others discover the truth for themselves, change becomes inevitable. Public agreement is camouflage. It puts them at ease, and that ease leads to exposure. When people think you're on their side, they show you everything. And when they speak too freely, the cracks reveal themselves. You don't need to push, you simply observe and nudge perception ever so slightly. Even in the corporate world, this tactic is used by quiet operators, those who rarely speak loudly, but somehow always shape the outcome. They validate bad ideas publicly, then raise small doubts privately. And over time, those doubts accumulate. The structure of trust around the person begins to hollow out. And when it collapses, no one knows exactly why. But you do. So here's the rule. When you cannot confront, you influence. When you cannot argue, you reframe. Let others hold the megaphone, you hold the compass, and as long as you point people gently in the direction of truth, they'll eventually see who was leading them astray. This is the fourth form of calm destruction. No fire, no noise. Just soft agreement in public, followed by precise questions in private. Because the most powerful people don't tear others down, they let the truth do it for them. Now, you don't need to exaggerate. In fact, subtlety is your greatest ally. You're not saying you're too bold. You're saying your boldness has always made an impact, and you say it just as the group is leaning toward humility, compassion, or collaboration. The contrast creates dissonance, not because you said anything wrong, but because you said something at the wrong time, and everyone notices. Let's take a real-world example. Consider Elon Musk. He is undeniably visionary, ambitious, and unfiltered. These are his strengths, but during moments of social or ethical sensitivity, these same traits can come off as tone-deaf or reckless. Now imagine someone publicly applauds his boldness in that exact moment. It may seem like praise, but it widens the gap between him and the room. That's how strength becomes spectacle. Seneca echoed this principle when he wrote, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." Many people expect their strengths to carry them forever. They assume what once earned them praise will always do so. But when you highlight that trait in a setting that demands something else, they're caught off guard. Their strength now feels like a costume worn to the wrong event. And that's the genius of this tactic. It's polite, it's public, it's coded in admiration, but it disorients because you haven't said anything unkind. You've only framed the strength in a moment that exposes its limitation. The key is timing. You wait for the right moment. You let the conversation create a contrast, and then you strike. Not with insult, but with applause. You place their trait on a pedestal and then step back as the room realizes it doesn't belong there. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity through framing. The Stoics teach us not to crush the ego with force, but to let it collapse under its own weight. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And when someone sees their most cherished identity being praised in an awkward silence, their reaction reveals everything. Some double down, some reflect, but all feel the shift. After delivering the praise, say nothing more. Let the words hang. Let the tension fill the space. The real impact of this tactic comes in the aftermath, in the silence that follows the applause. That's where the doubt begins to grow. That's where the identity begins to wobble. Because when someone is too attached to their strength, they stop adapting, they become caricatures of themselves, and when the group sees it, even before they do, the social balance begins to tilt. So the next time someone tries to dominate with their favorite trait, don't resist them, applaud them, loudly, respectfully, at the wrong time, and then go silent. Because the most precise destruction doesn't remove their strength. It places it under a spotlight until it blinds them. That is the fifth form of calm domination. Use their favorite weapon, just not in their favorite setting. Number 6, the final act, erasure and absence. The most devastating move you can make is not retaliation, it's not confrontation, it's not even justice, it's erasure, quiet, surgical, absolute. You don't announce it, you don't explain it. You simply disappear from their narrative and leave behind a silence so vast it echoes in their mind for years. This is not ghosting. Ghosting is reactive. This is a final act of control. It is deliberate absence, withdrawal without ceremony, no message, no speech, just void. And that void becomes a mirror in which they're forced to see what they've done, without your help in interpreting it. Stoic philosophy teaches that the highest form of self-respect is detachment from what you cannot control. Epictetus said it bluntly. Never depend on the admiration of others. There is no strength in it. When you disappear without drama, you demonstrate something rare and unshakable, that your peace no longer depends on their recognition, remorse, or return. And this is terrifying to the ego. Because closure gives people comfort, it gives them a script. Even if the ending hurts, at least it's an ending. But when you walk away without punctuation, without so much as a period, they're left wondering, was it me? Was it something I said? Did they ever care at all? And the more they think, the deeper they sink. Because you're no longer available to confirm or deny. You've become a ghost in their memory, unreachable, unexplainable, unfinished. Marcus Aurelius put it like this: to love only what happens, what was destined, no greater harmony There's a kind of sacred acceptance in realizing that not every story needs closure. Some people do not deserve a final conversation. They deserve distance, quiet, intentional distance. Now, this isn't about cruelty. You don't erase people because you enjoy the silence. It's because you've accepted the truth. They've violated your boundaries too many times. They mistook your forgiveness for weakness. They tried to see how far they could go without losing you, and now you give them the answer. You go not loudly, not bitterly, but fully. This act reclaims your energy. Every argument, every explanation, every attempt to be understood, it takes a piece of you. But when you choose absence, you regain all of it. You choose the clean cut over the slow bleed. And in doing so, you choose to stop performing for someone who was never really listening. Think of Steve Jobs, not just as a business icon, but as a man who mastered the art of selective silence. When someone no longer aligned with his vision, he didn't explode. He didn't over-communicate. He simply withdrew, cleanly, quietly, without permission. And people felt it, not because he said something loud, but because his absence was undeniable. It redefined the space he used to fill. That's what erasure does. It changes the emotional architecture of the relationship. Suddenly, your silence takes up more space than your presence ever did. They notice the void. They hear the echo. And if they were feeding off your energy, your approval, your availability, now they starve. But how do you do this with grace? You don't block them. That's emotional. You don't announce your exit. That's theatrical. You simply vanish from the shared script. You don't text. You don't check. You don't wait for a response. You don't let curiosity trick you into returning. You become absence itself. And most importantly, you don't look back, because erasure only works when it's complete. The moment you peek into their world again, you give them life. But when you hold the line, they begin to feel what they never thought was possible, the consequences of losing you permanently. Seneca wrote, "Withdraw into yourself. As long as you are tied to another, you are not yet free." Erasure isn't punishment, it's liberation. It's the moment you stop asking to be seen, heard, understood, or respected, and you start acting like someone who already is. Let them wonder where you went. Let them replay every word. Let them search for meaning in your silence. That's not revenge, that's reality reclaiming itself. Because in the end, the loudest goodbye is the one never spoken. And that is the final act of polite destruction. In a world that glorifies loud reactions and theatrical revenge, the greatest power you can wield is composure. You don't need to raise your voice to make a point. You don't need to argue to win. Sometimes the most destructive move is a calm smile, a well-placed question, or the simple act of disappearing. Stoicism isn't about suppressing your power. It's about refining it, turning fire into focus, turning pain into precision, and turning your silence into a strategy that speaks volumes. So the next time someone underestimates you, disrespects you, or tries to pull you into chaos, don't fight them, unread them, unfeed them, unexist around them. If this video spoke to you, subscribe and turn on notifications, because in a world full of noise, we are here to master the quiet and walk with power no one sees coming. Until next time, stay calm, stay clear, and stay untouchable.